I almost died. And if I hadn't lived, then this school, all of those students, our 12,000 graduates, it would have never happened. And because it was this, we opened the school in April of 2010. I had this cardiac emergency in November of 2010. None of this would, and I should have died that day, by the way. Even the cardiologist said to me, I don't know why you didn't die. And I think that was a critically important moment for me when I was, 16, 17 years old and got to see not only tragedy, but also when a life was saved. And that put me on this journey for the rest of my life.
Most people assume courage shows up in the moment, that when the emergency happens, somehow they'll know exactly what to do. But what if courage isn't created in the crisis? What if it's built quietly through years of preparation, discipline, practice, and choosing to become someone who's ready long before the moment ever arrives? Today's guests have spent more than 4 decades living exactly that philosophy. As a fire captain, talking about Brad now, paramedic, educator, CEO, Harvard-trained disaster medicine leader, and founder of one of the country's premier emergency medical training organizations, Brad's helped prepare thousands of people for the moments that matter most. But his newest mission reaches far beyond emergency medicine. It's about creating a world where ordinary people become extraordinary because they choose to be ready. Welcome back to another episode of the Perpetual Growth Podcast, where we explore the ideas, experiences, and people who help us grow in business, leadership, health, relationships, and life. Today's guests have lived a career that most people only experience through television. For more than 40 years, I'm going to say this combined, we've got Brad and Keira Newbury who have answered emergency medical calls where seconds determine outcomes. Now today, Brad, Keira, I would love if the two of you guys would actually take a moment to introduce yourselves. Tell the audience a little bit more about you, your backgrounds, the things that you've accomplished, and we'll dive in.
Sure. Thank you, Zach. Thank you so much for having us today. And Keira and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak to your audience. And like the opening said, I've been in fire and EMS virtually my whole adult life. Since I was 16 years old, I joined the fire service as a young volunteer and really never looked back. I've been a career firefighter and fire officer now for 29 years on top of my volunteer career. And I've been a paramedic now since I went to paramedic school in 1989. I always say I don't look that old, so the viewers that are watching, I don't, but it's true. However, one of the things that is, as my career expanded both in fire and EMS, but also too, I saw this gap in education, and I actually opened our own EMS education school in 2010, grew that company, ended up exiting out of that company, sold it to a private equity group. I stayed involved in that company, but was able to reacquire that company in 2016, and here we are today. And through that journey, we've had some not only incredible experiences out in the pre-hospital setting, but also in education. And we'll get to my book. We'll talk about the book that Keira and I wrote and why we wrote those stories and what does it mean to really be prepared. But Keira, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I have been in the emergency medicine realm my entire life. I'm just from my dad being in it, but my entire family too. And it really began when I was 2 years old and I was in EMT and paramedic classrooms and I had been learning different skills. But when I was 8 years old, I had gone to my parents and I said, I want to become an EMT. And they said, okay, well, when you get older, then we'll send you through the course. And I said, no, I want to be an EMT now. And they said, well, Massachusetts won't let that happen. So I didn't believe them and I went on my family computer, I Googled it. Turns out they were right. But I had found that there's no minimum age requirement to become certified in CPR. So I went back to my parents and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to become CPR certified. And they said, okay. And I had gone through the course and I presented my skills to my dad and I got my own CPR card. And I bragged about it in school. But when I became 18, I went through the course and I became a nationally registered EMT. I was in college at the time and I studied psychology and writing. And then my dad brought me this amazing idea of writing these stories and composing this novel. And it's been an incredible journey. And I'm so happy that I've gotten to do it, but that I get to do it with my dad.
And she's also missing the big piece too, that she spent several years in one of the leading trauma centers here in Boston and worked in the emergency room. So she got to see the emergency side of medicine every day.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. What a great introduction, guys. I'm so excited about this episode and interview. This is going to be a lot of fun, and I have a feeling already that we're going to have to bring it back for another conversation because 45 minutes is not going to be enough time. There's already several things I want to unpack. I mean, Keira, I'm sitting here doing the mental math in my head. I'm like, all right, my son's 10, he's in third grade. So you're in like first grade, getting certified for CPR. You've got to be, I mean, I would imagine one of the youngest. Yeah, you got like a Guinness record or something for the youngest person certified in
I have
CPR.
no idea. I don't know the world record on that.
You might want to check that out. I might be able
Yeah.
to add your name here shortly. I mean, Brad, let's start with you. I mean, when you look back across your entire journey, and Kara, I heard a lot of the inspiration here too, but I'd love to have you expand upon. I mean, what originally called you toward emergency medicine?
Honestly, if the show Emergency was one of the main drivers. If your audience knows, remembers back in the 70s where Johnny and Roy were two LA County paramedics, and they were zooming around the county saving lives. And then, when I was 10 years old, I had two uncles in the fire service. One was a great uncle, and I really didn't know his journey so much in the fire service, but I had another uncle who had been in a city department just south of where we are here in a small city in Massachusetts called Fall River. And my mom would drop me off at the firehouse, and I'd get to visit with my uncle and meet the men that were in the firehouse. And actually, his captain used to let me ride along with them on the fire truck. So it really instilled. One, I saw how they performed every day. It also instilled the core values of who I am, and in particular, a life of service. But those were also shaped by my father. My dad was a Special Forces Marine, a Force Recon Marine during the Vietnam era. And so I love to say I grew up with the pearls of Marine Corps wisdom. And I had an amazing father who's a story in the book, and we'll get to that too as well. But so from a young age, I saw a life of service, and I saw how other people served others, and what an impact they made on other people, which was something that touched me in a way that I knew I wanted to do this. And then when I turned 16 years old, the day I turned 16, I joined the volunteer fire department, and that started me on that journey. And I truly got to see what it was like to, one, take care of people, take care of other folks, and also showing up at somebody's worst day of their life. And I think that was a critically important moment for me when I was 16, 17 years old, and got to see not only tragedy, but also when a life was saved. And that put me on this journey for the rest of my life. I actually, it's kind of funny. I tell the story. I went to engineering school and I hated it. I mean, hated it. I had gotten a scholarship to go, and my mother. I dropped out of school. I went to pursue being an EMT and paramedic. My mom didn't speak with me for a month, but my dad, who had spent a big time, a big part of his life in service to our country, really understood that, and he was a great mentor to me along the way.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was a lot. Many people would say, well, your parents kind of just put you into this realm. And don't get me wrong, they did. Like I said before, I was in these classrooms since I was 2 years old. And along the way, I was playing the role as a patient, and I was in the labs doing starting IVs, and I was competing against other students for how fast I would be able to intubate the mannequin. But what people don't really teach you, and we try our best to teach, but it can be hard sometimes, is the fact that empathy goes way further than any action that you perform. And I think that empathy has always been ingrained in me, and helping people has always been ingrained in me. And I think that there wasn't a question of anything else that I could do besides writing that would fulfill me the same way.
That's
And it's
fascinating. And one, yeah, I hear a spirit of service as a common theme throughout the family, and
Yes.
those
and it
shared
really is.
values.
Yeah, it really is
And
that.
while you were born in that environment, at the same time, that doesn't mean that you were predestined to be there. I mean, we're all
Yeah.
different people. There was something inside of you that found love and joy through that spirit of contribution. You could have gone any direction. It's not like
Yeah.
it was just handed to you. So I started a family business. I understand these dynamics in ways that many people can't relate to. And people are like, oh yeah, it was easy. You just got, no, it's not easy. It was
Yeah.
something I chose to do. It was a battle every day. And one thing I want to hear more about, Kira, you mentioned something very, very important. You didn't start going to the clinical aspects of what you guys do as EMTs. You led with the emotional.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit more about that empathy piece and how that affects how you guys show up for your patients and the people that you serve.
Absolutely. And one thing that we've really tried to push and accomplish with this book is the fact that we as emergency medical professionals are driven by empathy.
Mhm.
And from the outside, we can appear jaded or through our dark humor, where we really are just coping with a lot of things that we're dealing with ourselves.
Mhm.
It's the long night shifts, the terrible pay. um, it all accumulates to the bigger picture, but a lot of people really say, oh, EMS, they have no empathy and they're mean and all these things. And I love to say that that's just not true, because these people would not be doing this for as long as we do it if we weren't driven on empathy, if we didn't care about our patients, because there's no other way we would be able to live the lives that we do if we didn't have that other aspect. And this book, we wanted to put it in a way where, yes, we're out there and we're pushing it to people who need to go get certified in CPR, and we want that to happen so that they can save their loved ones, their friends, or a stranger on the street. However, it's for the medical professional who needs to be reminded of their why. Because as we
Yeah.
go and we have these experiences of people who don't appreciate what we do fully, or we have bosses and employers who don't appreciate what we do fully, we have to remind ourselves that this matters, the work that we do matters. And so I think everything we do is heavily driven on emotion.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, there's a couple things that I don't want to go too deep on this because I'll get out in the weeds. But one thing that was important that you highlighted was, you know, EMTs, anybody in emergency medical services, I mean, well, not anybody, but the majority, they don't make a lot of money. They're doing it because of the service, the contribution. And it's easy to mistake somebody's, what you might consider despondence in the moment as a lack of empathy. But I think I would look at it as more as an aspect of compartmentalization and focus on the thing that is most pressing in the moment, which is
Absolutely.
saving somebody's life. I mean,
Yes.
and what I heard through this, and I don't want to assume that this is a mission, and I would love to hear your guys' take, but it sounds to me like your mission is to empower everybody across the United States, potentially across the world, with the tools, knowledge, training, resources that they need so they can be prepared in that moment, regardless of what life happens, whether it's friends and family around them or the car accident down the street. I mean, what I would love to hear from you guys, what is the broader mission?
Sure. So the bigger mission around our book was to tell some of these human stories about individuals that were saved.
Mm,
And I think we should unpack the if we want to go down that road right now about unpacking the title and those kinds of things. But really the big mission was to tell stories about individuals that had suffered critical emergencies in the out of hospital setting that lived. And there's some really powerful stories in our book. There's one story, and all started because I used to give this talk, or I give this talk at graduation to our paramedic students. And so the name of the talk was, what does it mean to save a life? And really what I was trying to do is, as our students are exiting out of the program, as they're going out to take care of people, and I wanted to give them some nuggets of what they're doing every single day and why it matters. And I was involved in a call in 1994 with one of the characters in the book, with Frank Nagel. And I was involved in Frank's resuscitation. And Frank went on after, we shocked him 5 times during, he went and he had no pulse, not breathing, and we ended up shocking him 5 times on the way to the hospital. By the time we left him in the emergency room, Frank was awake, talking to his son and talking to the physician that was there. This was 1994. And through some incredible circumstances that we unpack in the book, that I tell the story in the book, Frank lived another 25 years.
wow.
and you think about the true impact that we make on individuals. There's another story that really drove home the preparedness side of bystanders, of individuals who are standing there when in the moment when an emergency happens. Will they see themselves as the one that will act? Will they be the one that steps forward? And there's a story in the book with John Perino, where John went into cardiac arrest on the dance floor in a Polish club, and two bystanders began CPR, which filled a gap because there is a time gap. You only have so many minutes. You only have really 4 to 6 minutes before brain death takes over. And if no one's doing CPR in the moment, by the time you call fire and EMS, and I've seen it so many times in my career, even despite that, when the tones go off and we're running to our trucks, and I still continue to work as a career fire officer. I just got off duty this morning. And despite all that I get to do and blessed, in my life, I still love my job, and I love going to work every day and serving other people. And so when that bell goes off and we start getting to our trucks and we're responding, we know time is of the essence. But we also know that the survivability of that patient is also going to be determined by the person standing next to them. And by the way, 73% of all cardiac arrests happen in the home. And I would ask your audience is how many of you are prepared for that moment when your loved one who's standing next to you suddenly drops to the floor and doesn't have a pulse? Are you prepared for that? So the bigger mission around this book was these stories, and getting back to John's story, it's an amazing story. But after we arrived at John's emergency, there was bystander CPR being done. We spent more than 30 minutes trying to resuscitate John on the dance floor. And we shocked him 9 times, which is another unbelievable story. But John spent 2 weeks in a coma, and then he went home to his family neurologically intact. He woke up. And the only reason he was able to do that was because of those two bystanders who filled the gap of time by doing CPR, creating circulation, and then giving us the opportunity as the paramedics showing up in that emergency to make a true difference in his life. And then the story of what came after is absolutely amazing, and how John filled those 27 years. I mean, think about that now. John died, and then he lived another 27 years after that. Think about what those two bystanders gave his family. It's incredible.
It's not only the family. The thing I can't help but think about is you not only save the individual, but that additional 25 years, imagine the ripple effect of that impact. If that individual had not been here, think about the effects it would have had on his family. Think about the life that he went on to build and create, the other people he got to impact, where he got to share that story. God only knows. I don't know what their backgrounds are, but I have to imagine that experience transformed him as a person. But obviously, it has an impact on you. And now that becomes something that extends across many multiples, across time and space. What a beautiful gift. Now, guys, one thing I have been thinking about is, most people hear emergency medicine and they do think CPR, ambulances, fire trucks. But listening to you guys, it feels like you're really teaching something much bigger. It's preparedness, and not just medically, but emotionally and even philosophically. If someone listening never became a paramedic, never fights a fire, never responds to an emergency, what principles from your career do you believe every person should adopt?
I'm going to answer that, but I think we also have to go back for 1 second, because what you said about ripple effect is exactly a metaphor that I use in the book, and I tell a story in there, and I think it's super impactful.
Yeah.
And I think we have to start. Let's go back and start with the name of the book. Yeah. And Keira actually was the one who came up with the name of the book. Mm-hmm. And I think it's critically important that we unpack that first, and then we'll get to preparedness. But go ahead, Keira. Why don't you tell them how we came up with the name? Well, I didn't say we. How you came up with the name.
I was going to say, I was the one who did it. So we had been going back and forth a lot about what it was going to be called. And my dad, when he had proposed this idea to me, he had a title already just saved. And
by the way, she turned me down several times when I asked her if she would do this with me.
I did. But I didn't really think that it truly encapsulated the theme of what we were trying to portray in the book. And so I had been just going back and forth with ideas of what we could call it. And I went to him and I said, "Have you heard of the butterfly effect?" And he said, "No." I said, "Okay, well, in short, a butterfly will flap its wings in South America and then go on to cause a tornado in Texas." And he said, "Okay, what does that have to do with anything?" And I said, "Well, I think that that really encapsulates what we're trying to do with these stories, in the sense that these micro decisions and these micro happenstances turn lives around, and they have these catastrophic effects on how all of this correlates to one another." So I had brought to him, I said, this is the saved effect. The ripple effect, whatever you call it, it is its own effect now.
And then I had always been thinking about the ripple effect, and I've been teaching that story of Frank Nagel into our paramedic students, and I talk about how it's like throwing a pebble in the pond, and I actually have a great story of my son and I fishing, and I tell the story in the book, and how my son Colin threw a pebble in the pond, and how I saw the ripples move out, and it really is a metaphor for that life, whether that life is saved or that life is lost. Particularly if that life is saved, you have an incredible ripple effect, because the people that are touched the most are that first ring, that inner circle, and those are the individuals, their family, and then it moves out into their friends, their community, and then everybody they would touch in the rest of their life. And if they were lost that day, those circles would never expand; they would never move out. So that ripple effect would never take place. Everything would end that day. And so that's really going back to that part that you were talking about. That is the true piece of this book, that we wanted to get that story out, because we have a number of stories, and believe me, they're incredibly powerful, of individuals that were saved that went on to do some amazing things, and who are still living, who are still continuing to live, and we don't know what the end of their story will be. And no one does, right? So, and why it's important. Why is it important to be prepared? Because, and the great thing about Keira is that she has a degree in psychology, so she's able to help bring the psychological aspect. One, there's a true, we call the bystander effect, where people are hesitant to move forward. But our whole goal was to inspire people by these stories, get them trained in CPR if they haven't been, and then be ready and willing to act. Because there are, and that's a saying at the end of every story in our book, because there is a mindset, and we actually did a video around that mindset of, will you be the one? How do you see yourself showing up for the person who needs you the most that day?
Do you mind if I share a short story that
No,
illustrates
please.
this so well?
Absolutely. This is what we love to hear.
This is, I love what you guys are saying on so many different levels, because I've witnessed this firsthand so many times. The bystander effect is absolutely real. And I can think of three very specific circumstances where I've been a party to some interesting situations, two of which were with my mom. My mom has an accident waiting to happen. I get a call from my dad. I was on a date. This was years ago, or well, decades ago, probably. And my dad's like, "Your mom fell her head. I got to take her to the emergency room." He's like, "You need to get here now." And I'm sitting there thinking, why aren't you taking her to the emergency room? So, I had to go through everything from paying the bill to getting there. God knows it'd probably been 20 or 30 minutes. I show up, my mom takes her hand off her head, and all of a sudden, blood is spurting on the wall and the ceiling. And I'm like, holy shit, she hit an artery. I'm like, immediately grab a towel, put pressure on her head. I'm in the back seat holding my mom's head, trying to keep her calm so she doesn't go into shock, while my dad's driving us to the ER. And I'm like, oh my Lord, one case in point example of my dad froze in the moment, and I never would have expected it. Another that was a little less severe, but it's a great example of knowing when to act too. My mom, name a person on the planet that does this. She's cleaning one of my dad's fishing lures, cleaning a fishing lure, yeah. And all of a sudden she comes upstairs, she's like, Zachary, she's got a lure through her thumb and out the nail on the other side with barbed. And she's like, just tear it out. And I'm like, Mom, that thing ain't coming out. I'm like, that terrible idea. My father-in-law's there. He's about to pass out. He can't handle blood. I'm like, I'm not tearing this thing out. We got to stay calm. I wrap it up so she can't see it. I'm like, let's get her to the ER. They got to handle this. I'm not pulling that out. That was number two. It's also knowing when not to act. Number three, this one will really resonate. I'm at an event. One of our speakers is on stage. I'm sitting at the back of the room preparing, and I look up and I see him start to look up and to the left, and shoulders start to drop and he starts to stumble through his words. And at first I thought he was starting to have a stroke. I started bolting to the front of the room. By the time I got there, he was on the floor having a seizure. And everybody else is, what do we do? You know, and I'm like, all right, we got to get him on his back, elevate his feet, put something under his side so he's turned a little bit. And the event he starts to, vomit, go into convulsions, unbuckle his belt, got more room to breathe. You call 911. It's knowing that, most people, what do? Somebody call 911. Who calls 911?
No one.
No one. You call 911. How that somebody's got to be the leader and the decision maker in that moment. Thank God for some of the background and training and stuff that I'd had, and but it's not innate for so many people. And I'm not going to say that it was for me too. It starts with, above all, from what I hear from you guys, preparedness.
Yeah.
We have to know what to do fundamentally first so that we can act and react appropriately in the moment.
Yeah.
So I love what you guys are doing, because I think about it with, every parent should have this kind of training, but frankly, every person in any room should, because something can happen in any moment.
It's so funny that you say that too, because we've been working with somebody who had brought it to us, and he said, well, I have a little boy at home and I think that I really need to be trained, but it really got me thinking at night that my parents aren't trained. And he goes over there, and his parents, the little boy's grandparents, are constantly watching him all the time. And what would happen if he started choking on something? I mean, he's 2, he's now eating solid foods. And but to go back to your point about the bystander effect, it's so funny how you said that preparedness and your training and your background in it is something that made you step forward. And those are the things that can bypass the bystander effect. Biologically, as human beings, our brains are telling us to not act in those situations because we're looking to other people and we're saying, well, somebody else knows what to do more than I do. Or I'm going to hurt the person, somebody else should do it so that I'm not the one in trouble. Or whatever it is that they're thinking. But the only way to bypass that is through education, training. But the third one that most people can't get is experiences. And just by reading these stories and putting yourself into these people's shoes, you're gaining these experiences. So if the time comes, then you will know that you have to bypass this and you have to step forward.
And through that education and training is where you begin to see yourself as that person who will step forward in that moment. And there's been there've been times in my career, it's funny, as you tell the story, your mom, she's got an arterial bleed in her scalp, and probably it was like a varicose vein or something to that effect. But either way, that you didn't dial 911, you put her in the car and drove her to the hospital, which is funny on so many levels. Because I will tell you that we go to so many calls where they're not even close to that level of an emergency that your mom has. But I think it's important that your listener understands that there are these times when that knowledge, skill, and ability will force you to step forward when you see that there's a life on the line. And it was interesting as you started to unpack the speaker having a seizure. And here's what Keira was saying about experiences, because sometimes the person who goes into cardiac arrest in the very beginning looks like a seizure. So and then there's a delay. We actually, Dr. Antevi, who's one of our, he talks in the book about literally just that of, do you recognize what the emergency truly is? And then he gives a story of this couple who was sitting in a booth at a restaurant, and the gentleman goes into cardiac arrest, but it looks like a seizure to his wife. But a firefighter who was retired across the restaurant sees it, recognizes it, because he's had years of experiences recognizing these types of emergencies, and immediately goes over, pulls him on the floor, and starts CPR right away. So, and then he saved his life. So these things are critically important. That, one of our characters in the book, he says, he believes it's a human right that everybody knows CPR. And I think it's important, because if you don't see yourself from a psychological standpoint as the one that will step forward, you might not. But we also, too, and if you haven't been trained in CPR, if you can't get there just yet, if you dial 911, most systems have a dispatcher that will give you instructions over the phone. And many times in my career, I went to a cardiac arrest just a few weeks ago, and on the way there, the dispatcher was giving us information saying that there's an elderly woman in the house, and despite them trying to give her instructions, she wasn't physically able to move her husband to the floor. He was a really big guy, and okay, that we understand that, but I also knew too we were behind the eight ball going in there. And so when you start to think about yourself and you start to think about others around you, and you say to yourself, do I have the knowledge? Do I have the skill? Do I have the ability? And will I be the one? That is the most important.
I love that principle. And what I also love that you guys shared too is it doesn't have to start with going directly to the CPR certification. Even the power of knowledge through story starts building the foundation that we need to be able to act and react accordingly in the moment. And those stories can also be a really powerful motivator in the moment. I mean, I love understanding where the book came from. And the title itself specifically. I mean, I hear your guys' passion and enthusiasm, your spirit of service. I mean, tell me this. I mean, what surprised you both most while writing it?
I think for me, the thing that surprised me most was how we both reacted to other people's stories. And in a sense that we knew these stories happened and we were part of them every day. But despite that, seeing the emotions and hearing how much it meant to their families was something that was so emotional and cathartic for both of us.
We actually, for whether the individual who was saved is still alive or their family members, Keira and I brought him here to our studio and we interviewed him on camera. So we have all these interviews, and we will release them later on after the book is out. And so there was incredible amounts of emotion here. I mean, we had boxes of tissues for not only the folks, because they shared their stories, they shared their emotions, and it was so raw that they're crying, we're crying, Jake, our media guy, he's crying. Like everybody's emotional because it's a human story, and we can connect at that level. And despite that, I've been to thousands and thousands of emergency calls in my career. These stories are what connect all of us as human beings, because there are these emotions that surround that, and what it meant to hear, what it meant truly, what it meant to these families to have their loved one back for this incredible arc of time was something that I don't know, and as I don't know that I truly appreciated until we sat with them, and I also, it was cathartic for me too, because as a first responder, it brought me back to my why. Why do I do what I do every single day? Why do we continue to serve, even though it can be really hard some days? But if you save one life, you impact one life, then that ripple continues. And Keira had a really great perspective on the emergency room that I hadn't actually had, because in our world in EMS, we bring them to the emergency room, we drop them off, and generally we don't hear about what happened next. And even if we did, let's say we had a great save where you had an individual who suffered an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, we saved them, we bring them to the emergency room. We might see them a couple of months later, the family might come, we get hugs all around, but we never hear about the story after. And what this is the story after. And Keira, why don't you talk about how your perspective on the emergency room versus our perspective in the field?
I think it was really similar, but when you had brought up that point, I hadn't even thought about it for myself either, because EMS drops them off in the emergency room, and depending on what the patient is experiencing, the emergency room will have them from an hour, 2 hours, up to maybe 3 days. However, we send them up to the floors, and then we don't get to see what happens after that. And EMS may have these awards given to them, or they may go to the firehouse and be able to catch the shift that had saved them. But most of the time, that doesn't happen in the emergency room either. We have so many shifts, and it's never the same. It's never the same group either. So even if a patient does bring cookies or something, the nurses, the techs, the doctors who had an impact on that patient may not even get to see how grateful that the family is.
Yeah. So very true. And it's interesting because there's the reward and the wonder. You know what happened next? Days, weeks, months, years from now. I mean, tell me this, guys. Like, if someone only remembered one idea after finishing the book, what do you hope it is?
Be willing to act.
Hmm. Willing to act. You've obviously thought that one through just a little bit, Kira.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
tell me this, guys. Imagine it's many years from now. Your career's concluded, the business you've grown, the certifications, the titles, the awards, the things that also eventually fade. What do you hope people say was the ripple effect of your lives?
That's a great question. And,
Mhm.
when I look back on my career and our life, I have a passage in the book, and I say that at the end of my life, I want the people to remember the memories that we made with them. I want the people to remember, how we impacted their lives. I want my children to sit around a fire with my children and grandchildren and talk about some of the crazy antics we did growing up. Because those moments, right? Each one of those moments matter. And the reason that we do what we do is to make impact on other people. We're an incredibly mission-driven organization here at our school, but also I grew up in mission-driven organizations, and that mission matters. And we always say patient care matters. And also too, I'm a true stake, and I have been a true stakeholder in the education that we've delivered here. Former graduates of our program have taken care of my mom, my dad, both my in-laws. My son was critically sick once, and one of our graduates came to our school,
Wow.
came to our house, and then a great story in the book is about my dad, Joe. My dad suffered an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest at 80 years old and was fully resuscitated, neurologically intact, and gave us incredible amounts of more time, and including and by the way, one of the folks that was there at his cardiac arrest was one of our graduates, and my dad was saved that day, and went on to have this other incredible story after, like what were the ripple effects after, and I'll leave it as a cliffhanger. But Keira got to be an ordained minister for one day, well, really more than one day, but for that day, for a day, and got to marry her sister from my dad. So
Wow.
So when you think about, that impact that you have on not just other people, but the world, and every graduate that we have that moves out of our school every day, we can never predict where the ripple effect of that goes. And by the way, there's a story there in our book too about how I almost died. And if I hadn't lived, then this school, all of those students, our 12,000 graduates, it would have never happened. And because it was this, we opened the school in April of 2010. I had this cardiac emergency in November of 2010. None of this would, and I should have died that day, by the way. Even the cardiologist said to me, "I don't know why you didn't die."
What did that mean to you, Brad? I mean, knowing what these not the last portion of your story, but more specifically, when you saw past students of yours show up at your door to help members of the family, to help members of friends. I mean, what did you take away from that?
First and foremost, I was incredibly proud, right? That we were doing something that mattered, and that we were stakeholders in that education.
Mhm.
But it really reignited the purpose of what we do, because I got to see, I've lived both sides of the rescue and the rescuer, and I also got to see the two sides of somebody's story. I lost my mom suddenly, and never really got to say goodbye. Where I lost my dad, my dad's passed away now, but we had more time with my dad. We had a second chance with my dad, and I got to say everything that I wanted to say to him, and he got to say everything he wanted to say. And when he finally passed away, there was no questions. There was nothing left. We had said it all, and it gave us that incredible amount of time after to be able to be with him and be present, and that is what I'm so proud of. And I'm also proud, one of the things about asking Keira to be involved in this project, not only was, she's a phenomenal young writer who, when she was in college, her professor, she's got a minor in writing, and professors would champion her. And we actually, my wife and I would get invited by our professors to go see the oral presentations that they were doing of their writing. So I really knew the emotional impact that Keira could have on other people with her writing. So that was, not only just a proud dad moment, but I'm not a trained writer. I'm a trained academic writer, right? I have a graduate degree, and you had mentioned earlier about the work I do with the Disaster Medicine Fellowship at the Beth Israel Hospital. And we write tons of papers. We do a bunch of research. So I've been writing academically for a while, for a long time. And that's a big difference from writing academically, when you're doing research to writing a nonfiction book and really pouring your heart into that. And then Keira actually made me so much better, right? Because of her education that I didn't have. And she'd read a passage, she'd come to me, she'd say, you can make this better. Tell me what was the sunlight, coming through the trees. What did that look like? Like she helped me be a better writer during that. And so that impact that we're going to make and that we're making, because, as she started telling the story about one of the, his name's Nick, as Nick had read some of the stories and then realized, like, oh my goodness, my family doesn't know how to do this. My family does, and my child is left with my family. And then he said to us, hey, can we come to your school and learn this? Can I bring my family? We said, absolutely, right? So, Nick's a good friend. And so it was that impact, because everyone who has read this book so far, whether it be a lay person or whether it be a first responder or a healthcare provider, just connects to this on such a level. And of course, we're the authors, we're saying that, but I promise you, Zach, when you read this book, you're gonna see yourself in some of these stories. And are you willing and able and ready to act?
Yeah, I love this, guys. I mean, as we wrap up today's episode, there's a couple things I want to reflect upon and go back through, critical takeaways. I mean, one thing is that I've heard all throughout this, and this was a subcontext, but I hope the whole audience caught onto this, is Keira very clearly mentioned there's not a lot of money to be made in as an EMT. However, you guys are proof that success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure, and you have found a way to create a phenomenal business that not only allows you to thrive, but creates that ripple impact, the save effect that literally transcends generations. I mean, has the ability, opportunity to impact so many lives in so many ways that we can't even imagine or anticipate. And one theme that keeps coming back to me throughout the conversation is we often think that heroes in life are extraordinary people. But listening to you, I'm beginning to believe more and more that heroes are simply ordinary people who prepared before the moment arrived. So, I mean, thank you guys both for dedicating your lives to making the rest of us a little bit more ready. Now, if you're listening today, a few ideas worth carrying with you. Preparation creates confidence long before confidence is ever needed. Leadership is measured most clearly during moments of uncertainty. Calm, it's not a skill. Is a skill. It's not simply a personality trait. Very important. It is learned and developed. And your daily habits determine how you respond during those extraordinary moments. And one prepared individual can permanently alter another person's future. Now, if today's conversation resonated with you, first, I encourage you guys to pick up Brad and Keira's new book, The Saved Effect. Whether you're a first responder, a business leader, a parent, or someone who simply wants to be better prepared for life's unexpected moments, I think you'll find its message both practical and inspiring. And if this episode challenged your thinking, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody you care about. These conversations grow because of listeners like you, and every share helps us reach someone who may need exactly the message they hear today. Now, Brad, Keira, one quick moment. Where is it best for our listeners to find you? Of course, you've got the book. Where can they find the book? Website? Where are the best places to reach out if they want to get to know more about you, your story, your services, how they can work with you guys? Please tell us more.
The book's being published on August 18th, but we're in pre-sale right now. So at The Saved Effect, thesavedeffect.com is the best place to go. If they go, you can buy the book wherever you like to buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's out there on all the platforms. But if you come back to our website, so if you go to our website first, click on one of the links, you can go out and buy the book, and then come back to our website. We have over $300 worth of gifts for your listeners. First, we'll send them immediately. We'll send them a digital version of the book, so they can start right away reading. But you got to get that. You got to get that physical book. You got to love that book, right? Two, we'll also send you the audiobook. Keira and I produced a pre-release audiobook just for our listener, for your listeners and the folks now. We are producing a audiobook for the future, but this one is very special to Keira and I because we did it. And then we have a hands-only CPR class that Keira and I produced here in our studio, so that if your listener is like, hey, I need to learn this right now, go out, buy our book, go back in, put in your information. We'll send you that free class right away. And then we also have a book of quotes in there too as well. So all those free gifts. And if you want to get in touch with Keira or I, you can also find us at bradnewbury.com or
KeiraNewbury.com, and Keira Newbury on all on social media handles, and Brad Newbury on all social media handles too.
All right, guys. Well, to our listeners, make sure you head over to thesavedeffect.com and make sure that you pre-order your copy of the book. Start diving in, listening now, and of course, the physical read. Nothing can ever replace that. BradNewbury.com, KeiraNewbury.com. Of course, we'll have all of this in the show notes. But both of you, Brad, Keira, thank you guys so much for spending part of your day with us. And to our audience, remember, growth isn't something that happens overnight. It's built through small decisions, consistent preparation, and a willingness to become just a little bit better than yesterday. Until next time, remember, growth doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice.